Greetings and welcome to Introduction to Literature in English 200. I'm going to cover as much as I can in a 15-minute segment and then tell you that there is a related assignment if you're in my class. Um, so let's get started. Literature is defined in different ways by different people, but here's some of those. It's a product of someone's imagination, originality, thought, feelings, emotions, ideas. Now, some computer generation is possible now. There are some programs that actually generate content for people now without prompts. So it's not like correcting sentences, but it actually produces stuff. We're going to stay away from that definition for now, although I expect in the future literature may be redefined in that way to include it. It's a reflection of society, human nature, reality, and that is the truth regardless of the genre. It can be written or oral artistic works, especially with high and lasting artistic value. So just keep that in mind that it's not all about the written word. So this part, the importance of literature, I can't stress how important it is. Although like composition classes, I love those. Literature really reflects who we are, who we want to be, who we were, things like that. It improves our language too. It teaches us about life and culture. So if you think about some of those documentaries out there and experiences that other people have, if it's a truly objective, factual point of view of that culture, of that documentary, the evidence is there to support it, then it really does enrich our lives and teach us. It entertains us and provides useful occupation in your free time. So, it gives us a place to be inspired, to really enjoy ourselves. Sometimes it depends on your tastes in literature. It can help compare our own experiences with others. Now, again, I want to caution you that some of those experiences might not be authentic. It also depends on the type of literature that you're reading. It can make us wiser, more experienced. I like it because there are times when you will sympathize or empathize with some of the characters you read about and some of the stories you hear. So especially like based on true stories. Um, I know that recently my daughter and I saw Elvis, and there's an autobiography. I'm sorry, a biography about Elvis out there too, and it was really um, sort of painful that he never got to experience the world. And so connecting and comparing some of the experiences that he had with other singers, even. Um, or comparing them to our own lives, which I didn't have a lot in common with Elvis. Can't sing that good, and he certainly was famous, but he also had some of the desire to travel and all of that. Anyway, the film is good. So is the biography. So literature genres, there's prose, that includes fiction, nonfiction, poetry, and drama. And under drama, I also include film because I think it's important to do so. I know that in most books it says stage plays, but even though you have a shooting script for film, it still is a script that you use and has dialogue and descriptions. It's a little bit different, but it also can be grouped into drama, in my opinion. So we will look at those. Plus, it makes it more fun. Prose, it's just ordinary language. Of course, it can be colorful, and it's in written format for the most part. The fiction, a literary work about imaginary events and or characters. We're going to go through each different thing here in just a minute. So types of fiction you might find: adventure, fantasy, folk tales, historical fiction, mystery, realistic fiction, and science fiction. Most of those are probably not going to be a big surprise. So historical fiction, though, you can see some of the examples here. The time period is accurate. Um, Although it's a fictional story, it really can have some very true to the time period people. So if you've seen the Thornbirds or Roots, the clothing and the way things were handled in the story and the overall feel of the time period they're portraying really is a good definition of historical fiction. I encourage you that if you haven't read or watched Roots to actually do that. And the Thornbirds also has great value in it. Um, and and they're both very reflective of their time period. I personally haven't seen Shogun, but a student had mentioned it, and I liked the idea of including that. Um, and he said that it was wonderful. So realistic fiction, The Fault in Our Stars, is about a girl who's dying and a guy falls in love with her. Um, it's it's realistic fiction. So even though the story is not a nonfiction story, true story, right? It is based on things that can happen that you could believe um, really could really be real. It's usually modern events, current issues and problems. I want to say she had cancer, but I can't really remember. But she did have a terminal illness, and I won't tell you the end. So it is set in present day most of the time. So science fiction, one of my personal favorites, War of the Worlds, was interesting. There are many, so Star Wars and all of those, if you're going to talk about movies, but there's also books that most of those movies are based on. Most of the time, it's science fiction is set in the future. Can be based on actual events or imagined events. So, you can be inspired by a new world and create Avatar, right? So, which crosses into fantasy, really. But there was also some advancements that we saw in that movie with some of the aircraft and the way that they look at the ground and stuff like that. Um, so you can have more than one category fit something, right? It also may use ideas that explore the potential for advanced science. Mystery, if you're a mystery lover, that's wonderful. I like the way that things are sprinkled throughout books that are in this genre, in this category, and it ends with usually, I hope, the mystery is solved because that's miserable when it's not. Occasionally, it'll leave us hanging, but most of the time, they try to wrap that up and have some resolution in there. It's really suspense related mystery, and really seeking out to solve that crime. Now, fantasy, like I said, Avatar sort of fell into this category. I love the created worlds, magical places, and characters. Totally different from what we're used to. Um, I can't think of what the flying animals are called, but they were a wonderful touch to this. It really stretches the imagination. But the defining thing about fantasy is they can't ever really happen. So um, that's really what you to look at. Sometimes in science fiction, some of those could eventually happen, right? So space travel, if you think way back to Star Trek, I can't remember if that was pre-travel, but we've increased it. You know how I don't know if anybody's a fan, but they're taking ships and upgrading them and being able to travel further. And so we've sent um, some observation devices out into our galaxy, and I think a little bit beyond by now. So it's things that sort of could, but fantasy is like these creatures aren't going to exist. These blue people aren't going to exist. It's imagination. So, adventure characters are placed in dangerous and challenging situations. And of course, the protagonist, which is usually the hero of the story, uses the resources, their skills, they overcome the antagonist, right? Now, this could be like maybe Jumanji might fall into that category, but it also falls into um, fantasy. So I don't know. There are a lot of them though that you probably could find that fall into adventure. I was trying to think of the movie where they all turn into different play characters and stuff, but I know there's this one story where a scientist was sort of on safari and helped cure a disease, but it was all this action in it, and she had this bad guy chasing her with a gun the whole time trying to kill her. So it sort of fell into the adventure category there. Folk tales are really interesting, and I'm going to define those in a minute. The ones on this page, fables teach lessons using animals. That one's really cool. There's a story about a cat clan. There's a whole series of books on that that are just truly wonderful, and they teach about survival and um, family and loyalty and honesty and exploration. So there's all these different things in there that are pretty cool. If you want to know, I'll try to look it up. If you ask me, I'll find it for you. What is a legend? A story or set of stories that are considered fiction, right? They're handed down by tradition, usually concentrates on a specific person. Um, so the first movie that actually comes to mind here is I'm Legend. Um, which doesn't fit into this category, but that's the first thing that comes to mind. So it's when you're concentrating on a specific person or group of people from a certain time period. They're legendary, right? So the next one, fairy tales. This is a dragon picture, one of those open source pictures I could bring in, which I thought was a very cool picture. It typically has magical creatures, right? Magical elements, magical swords, magical powers. Now, I would say that Harry Potter dips into this category, but isn't completely in it. So, again, you can have crossovers between categories, and of course, those are based on a set of books, and it's pretty cool. So, spells and all of that jazz are part of fairy tales. The myths usually use God. Um, it usually uses gods for characters. So you can think, Zeus and all those fellas and females and everything. So typically based on historical event or some aspect of humanity. So explaining God might be one of those, or explaining how one god controls war. Who's that? Ares, I think. Maybe based on a natural event that serves as an explanation. So you believe that Zeus, took the rain away, or I don't know who's in charge of all of that, but like love happens when Aphrodite comes around, or stuff like that. So those are the myths. Tall tales are they're so super interesting. I remember when my daughter was young and she would come home and she would embellish stories. And she was actually telling me a tall tale, and I would say, "Now, are you telling me a story, or are you telling me what actually happened?" And she'd go, "Oh, it's a story." So the protagonist or the hero can easily do the impossible. She would tell me some stuff that was so cool. I wish I could remember all those stories to share with all my classes. It uses exaggeration, and they're usually funny, really because of the exaggeration. So if you've ever heard somebody tell a tale in class, or they're talking and you're like, really? You really did that? That's one of those tall tales, and they can range from the totally ridiculous exaggeration to slight exaggerations. Fiction genres are short stories and novels. Um, Love me some fiction. Um, I love short stories. Most people underrate those. So as you're looking at this, the short stories obviously are shorter prose. We're going to see those in our book. Typically revolves around one scene or event, because you can't tell an entire series of events in a short story, and it's usually one scene. In other words, one setting, one place, and time. It has very few or just one character. So that's the kind of stuff we're going to be reading a lot of in class. I did not assign a novel this semester, although I did consider it. Those are longer versions of short stories. They have more characters, they have more scenes, they may have more time periods. So there's a distinct difference between those, especially in length, but also in the way that they are constructed. Now remember that story elements from your childhood, you probably learned that there's characters, plot, point of view, setting, and theme. And we're going to go through just a few of those. I don't want to make the video too long. I said around 15. It's probably going to be more around 20. So people or other characters, such as animals in the story, those are your characters. And you can have different types of characters. Of course, most people are most familiar with protagonist and antagonist. And so the main character is the protagonist or the hero, and sometimes the anti-hero, which we probably won't have time to go into that till we get into films and plays. The antagonist, the character who is in opposition to the main character, places barriers in the protagonist's way. And that's really my favorite way to say that, is that they are responsible for those barriers. So your protagonist has this goal that they're looking forward to, and then your antagonist is the one who thwarts their efforts and tries to stop them from achieving this goal, whether intentional or not. Static characters, flat and dynamic, are other types of characters. The static ones don't change. It would be kind of like one of those role-playing games where it's a non-playable character, right? They just don't change at all throughout the story. Now, the flat characters, the author describes the character. So, like, if I were to describe someone in the room and tell you all about them, that is flat. So it's not a dynamic character, which would be the protagonist. Probably the antagonist and other characters can change throughout the story. So you really want dynamic characters. Occasionally you have to have the others, but those are the ones you really who really engage you into stories. And of course, the qualities of a good character, whether they're make believe, magical, it doesn't matter, need to be believable, consistent, and they need to have some sort of motivation in the story. If they don't even have a goal, that is not going to help you engage into the story or want to read it, right? You don't want to read it, you don't want to watch it, you're just like bored out of your mind. And if they're not believable, it's a little bit harder too. Uh, Now, I mean, even in some of the stories where these magical creatures exist, if the story is weaved in the right way, they can become believable, right? They don't have to be something that we believe is going to exist. They have to be believable as a character. Um, and then consistent. So when you have a personality of somebody, the personality might be revealed throughout the story, but it also has to be consistent to the character. So you don't want to like switch and make that character a completely different person if you're writing a story, right? Because the person reading it's going to be like, what? And you're not going to want to get into that. So we're going to skip plot on the actual PowerPoint. It's the storyline, right? It's pretty much that simple. It includes the whole story. So the point of view, a point of view is from the view of the narrator. So who is this narrator person? I'm talking to you currently. It's in first person. I'm saying I had my cup of coffee on the desk. I didn't feel good, whatever that is. That's the person who's talking, and then you have the third person. There are all types of different uh, third persons. There's omniscient, and we haven't gone through all those and everything. And I don't know if we will in this unit, uh, but we might. It depends on time and how far we get into everything. So just know for now that first person is that objective view. It's when the narrator is an actual character. And then the third person objective view is when the narrator is a witness. So setting is time and place. And then theme is the message that is generated out of the story. It's actually a message to the reader, to the watcher, viewer. Implied themes are those that are given through themes, not clearly stated, right? So the themes are not necessarily told to you directly. It might be done through stories and situations that people experience. For example, there's a TV show out there about suicide, and it could be giving you lessons, right, for each show about what this person experienced and some message that comes out of that that's not clearly stated in your face. Now, state themes, it should say stated here, I'm sorry, are explicitly given to the reader or audience. Those are very explicit. It might even be said by a character. It might be a message at the end. It's going to be in your face. So most things are implicit, but it doesn't mean that there aren't some that are clearly stated out there. Let me get this pause for a second. I don't want to make this too much longer, but I do need to tell you what nonfiction, short stories, novels, and other works about real events or characters, typically written for a certain population or group of people based on real people and events using facts. The narrator is a person, or it might be a computer-generated voice, and it can be used to explain something, inform the reader or viewer, persuade, or entertain. So there are a lot of reasons to be looking at nonfiction. Let me get it to go down here. Oops. Okay. So on nonfiction, you want to look for the purpose and main points in the reading. Support for the point should be present. This is based on fact, right? So you want something to be going on that is showing you that these are true stories, true events, true people. Through interviews, references, statistics, look for more organized methods than you might see in fiction. So it'll be much more organized in more like a linear line, you know, something straightforward and sort of like an outline. So the reading and watching of nonfiction might be a slower process because you're looking at uh, some of the facts, some of the organization here to find out what's going on. So here are some of the types, and I'm only going to define a few of these so that I can end the video. I want you to be very familiar with the types of nonfiction because some of these might surprise you. So you've got advertisements that you might see on TV, an atlas that tells about the world, shows maps. Autobiographies are about if I'm writing about myself. Biographies is if I'm writing about you. Brochures obviously are informational pieces of paper that you take with you. Editorials you might see in a newspaper, opinion pieces, but it's usually about something. And encyclopedias talk about, world, everything. Um, they're very concise. Like you might be talking about the history of World War II and talk about all the people involved and where it was and how it ended and how it began. They'll have dates, so they're reference material. Essays, obviously, you're in a writing class. You already know what those are. Can you write creative essays? Of course, but these are talking about research essays. How-to books and materials, like how do you do something, how do you cook something, how do you build something, fix something. Magazines can have both, but they are usually listed under nonfiction because they're usually informational. Memoirs are very personal stories, so they're a little bit deeper than autobiographies. They usually talk about one or two events. They usually have more emotion in them or not as matter of fact, so they're slightly different. Newspapers, I think everybody knows what those are. Reports could be like statistics or reporting on a business and how it's going. It usually has facts in it, usually has references depending on what it's for. And then, of course, textbooks, we already know what those are. So I hope that this serves as, there's so much about literature that I could say it's just exhaustive. But there are other classes that go way more into detail. Like, for instance, we'll talk about different types of themes later and story structures and all kinds of stuff. But for now, I want to stop here because I've gone over my self-imposed time of 15 to 20 minutes. And I want to allow you to sort of absorb what was said. I'm going to post this PowerPoint as well, but the descriptions obviously won't be in there. And hopefully you'll forgive me for any mishaps because I don't feel very good while I'm recording this. So anyway, thank you for listening, and I will post this and have you do the related exercise, so don't forget to do that. Thanks. Have a good day.